Hi guys, welcome back to another video. Today I'll be continuing the Psychology AQA A-Level exam board, looking at social influence as a part of paper 1. In the last couple of videos I explained the types and explanations of conformity and ASH and variations of those study. Today we're going to be looking at conformity to social roles, specifically with Zimbardo Stanford Prison experiment. The aim of this experiment was to see whether the guard's behaviour was caused by dispositional factors, so personality, or the situational factors, so being in the mock prison setting. So the procedure includes it being conducted in the basement of Stanford University, and 24 most stable out of 75 applicants were selected, and those 75 applicants applied through a newspaper. So they underwent assessments to make sure that they were all psychologically well, and 24 of those were selected. And then they were randomly assigned the role of guard or prisoner. The prisoners were arrested in their home by the local police and delivered to the prison. They were blindfolded, strip searched and deloused, issued a uniform and number, had nylon stocking caps and an ankle chain, and they were in prison 24 hours a day. The guards had uniforms, clubs, whistles, handcuffs and reflective sunglasses, and they could only refer to the prisoners by their number. The prisoners were allowed 3 meals a day, 3 supervised toilet trips, 2 hours for reading and letter writing, and 2 visiting periods and movies per week. And they had to be lined up 3 times a day to be counted and tested on prison rules. You do not need to know this procedure in all this detail. This is just to give you enough background information, but it is general knowledge behind the study. But do not worry if you think that you won't be able to remember all of it, because you don't have to. The findings of this study. Within only 2 days, the prisoners rebelled against the harsh treatment by the guards. They ripped the uniforms, shouted and swore at the guards, who then retaliated with fire extinguishers. They harassed the prisoners constantly, locked them in the hole, got them to clean toilets with their bare hands, and conducted frequent head counts in the middle of the night. 5 prisoners had to be released early because of extreme depression, and 1 prisoner developed a psychosomatic rash. Because of this, the experiment only ran for 6 days, but it was supposed to run for 14, so 2 weeks. So the conclusions we can draw from this study is that it revealed the power a situation can have on influencing people's behaviour, as the guards and prisoners all conformed to their roles within the prison. Their behaviour was a result of normative social influence and identification with their role as either a prisoner or a guard. They were overtaken by the role due to the environment they were in, the group they belonged to, and their loss of personal identity. Because if you remember, the guards had the reflective sunglasses, they all had a uniform on, the prisoners, they had their uniforms. They had no sense of individuality. And Zimbardo saw the similarities to his study and what the US guards were doing at Abu Ghraib. This table basically summarises everything that I've just explained and the differences between the guards and the prisoners. The guards were given appropriate uniform and were abusive and cruel, and they got increasingly brutal, but seemingly unaware of the effect that they were having. They were de-individualised, they were tyrannical, irrational, but identified with the role of a prison guard, or what they were expecting their behaviour to be based on just what they interpreted a prison guard to be like. On the other hand, the prisoners were humiliated, mistreated, with many breaking down. They became more submissive, and any revolt was stamped out by force. They were dehumanized, de-individuated, and, same as the guards, they identified with the role. Some general criticisms of this study, which can be useful to put in evaluations, is that it cannot be generalised / low population validity, as all of the students were psychologically stable, young, and American. It has low internal validity because it was artificial. All the participants knew that they were in an experiment and that they weren't in an actual prison. However, this can be questioned because they began to identify with the role, and something I mentioned in an evaluation also contradicts that point. But it does also have low ecological validity, as the basement of a university is not the same to a proper prison. So that is all the AO1 that you need to know for Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiment. So now we'll move on to the evaluations. The first evaluation is a strength of the Stanford prison experiment is that there was high control of variables, and this is most obvious when we look at the selection of participants. Emotionally stable individuals were chosen and randomly assigned to the roles of guard and prisoner, which rules out individual differences in personality as an explanation of the findings. If guards and prisoners behaved differently, but were only in those roles by chance, their behaviour must have been due to the pressures of the situation. This matters because it increases the internal validity of the study, so conclusions about the influence of roles on behaviour can be drawn up with confidence. However, a limitation of the study is the ethical issues involved due to Zimbardo's dual roles. There was an occasion where a student who wanted to leave the study spoke to Zimbardo in his role of superintendent, and the whole conversation was conducted on the basis that the student was a prisoner in a prison asking to be released, instead of it being a participant of a study wanting to withdraw. Zimbardo was only worried about the running of the prison instead of his responsibilities to the participants. The prisoners were also not protected against physical and psychological harm, with one participant developing a psychosomatic rash due to stress, as I've already mentioned. This matters because it shows the methodological issues in the study, as Zimbardo was no longer an impartial observer, and it shows that Zimbardo ignored guidelines to allow withdrawal at any time. If you have not touched on ethical issues yet, do not worry, you will get onto that in research methods, but this should give you a bit of a background about how you can include ethical implications in your evaluations, because that shows a higher level of knowledge. Then the last evaluation is another limitation of the study is the lack of realism. Banuzazi and Mahavidi in 1975 argued that the participants were merely play acting rather than conforming to a role. Their performances were based on their stereotypes of how guards and prisoners are supposed to behave. One of the guards claimed he had based his role on a brutal character from a film. This also explains why the prisoners rioted, because they thought that that was what real prisoners did often. Obviously, there are events such as Attica where revolts did take place. However, this is not a common occurrence. However, Zimbardo pointed to quantitative evidence gathered during the procedure, which showed that 90% of the prisoners' conversations were about prison life, with one prisoner expressing his belief that the prison was a real one. So this matters because it shows that some people were playing a role, but the prisoners in particular believed the situation was real, giving the study a high degree of internal validity. I hope those evaluations all sound good. If you are doing a 16 marker on Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiment, you will need 3 evaluations, unless there is a STEM or a scenario beforehand, then you only need 2. So now we will look over some example exam questions for you to have a go at. The first one is, many people have criticised Zimbardo's prison study. Identify and briefly discuss 2 reasons why people have criticised the study. And that's 6 marks. The second one is, describe and evaluate the procedure of Zimbardo's prison study. And that's 8 marks. So remember, for an 8 marker, you need 1 evaluation and a good chunk of AO1 at the start. So give yourselves maybe 15 minutes or so to have a go at both of them, and then continue the video as I go over the mark scheme. So for the first question, some possible criticisms could include the ethics from the psychological harm, because participants soon became distressed, and Zimbardo himself took part in the action and was a participant observer, when actually he should have remained completely away from the study and not have gotten involved. Some possible discussion points is whether or not the distress should have been anticipated, whether or not consent was sufficiently informed, how Zimbardo's own behaviour affected the way in which events unfolded, so whether the validity of the findings can be questioned. And you can use examples from the study to support argument and elaborate on the criticisms given. If you struggled answering this question, go back over the video and have another go. Give yourself 5 minutes or so, just give it another go. Then for the second question, possible contents, that's your AO1. You could say how it was 24 US male student volunteers that were randomly assigned role of prisoner or guard. The prisoners unexpectedly arrested at home, deloused, given prison uniform and ID number. They were given some rights. Guards were given uniforms, clubs and whistles. Zimbardo took role of prison superintendent. It was supposed to last for 2 weeks, but was stopped after 6 days. Evaluation points, you could talk about ethical issues, such as lack of informed consent, whether or not the consent gained was sufficiently informed, deception, lack of protection from psychological harm, because obviously the prisoners experienced huge amounts of distress, should that have been anticipated. Zimbardo playing a dual role, his behaviour affected the way in which events unfolded. Thus, the validity of the findings can be questioned. Methodological issues include sample bias, demand characteristics, lack of internal validity, lack of ecological validity, mundane realism and their implications for the findings, and good internal validity because of the participant selection by doing the random allocation of roles. Obviously, you do not need to talk about all of this. These are just suggestions, so do not think that you need to cram all this information in, because you don't. Pick and choose the information which you think is most important and incorporate that into your answer. You do not need to talk about everything. So I hope that you guys found this video useful, looking over Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiment, and I will be back soon with another video.